Jameson whiskey and beer. Is this a match made in heaven, or have they missed a trick? Let's find out in this week's Whiskey Review. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm a whiskey nerd, and this is the Jameson Caskmates IPA edition. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now, many of you might be familiar with the Jameson Caskmates series. It's where they essentially take Jameson whiskey and they finish it in craft beer barrels. The first of this was the Stout edition, and it was very, very popular. The Caskmates Stout edition took the caramel notes you get in Jameson and combined them with the chocolate and coffee notes you get in a stout for a really, really good whiskey. And if you want to see a review of that whiskey, check it out up there. That Stout Caskmates edition came first, and it was very, very popular. I guess Jameson must have figured that Stout isn't the most popular kind of beer, but IPA is a very, very popular beer style, so why not experiment with an IPA finish and see what that can bring to the whiskey. Whiskey and beer is a classic combination, and so for this collaboration, Jameson decided to partner up with 8 Degrees Brewing. They're a very, very nice beer brewer here in Ireland, and they make some very nice IPAs. So they took some casks that used to hold IPA beer, they added their own whiskey to it, left it for a few months, and then they disgorged it to give us this whiskey. So let's stop talking about it and let's get into the nose. Right off the bat, you're met with that classic Jameson kind of caramel sweetness. It's a very nice, refreshing sweetness. Like Jameson whiskey, it's mostly grain whiskey, which is a light kind of flavour in the whiskey, but because there's a lot of bourbon barrel influence, you get this nice caramel, vanilla sweetness that comes through. But then as you go into it a bit more, as you kind of open it up a little bit more, you get a lot of kind of floral, fresh aromas coming through. These floral, fresh aromas are quite nice. They're subtle enough on the nose, but they do deliver a nice bit of citrus, a nice bit of kind of grassy herbs, and the citrus is almost reminiscent of like a grapefruit. It's that kind of crisp, kind of sharp citrus. It's not like an orange, which is softer. It's not like a lemon, which is kind of sour, or it's more like that crisp, kind of sharp citrus you get from the grapefruit. If you're familiar with an IPA style beer, you'll know that kind of crisp, dry grapefruit taste, as well as the kind of floral, hoppy aromas you get from an IPA. So that is actually coming through quite strongly here in the whiskey. Other than that, it's just a pretty standard, nice Jameson experience. It's light and it's clean. It's not upsetting on the nose, it just doesn't have a lot of depth to it. So let's go for the palate and see if we can find anything that opens up. Immediately on the palate, there's definitely something different about this whiskey. I'm quite familiar with a standard Jameson whiskey, but this does deliver something different. Like you get that caramel, but then immediately you're hit with something sharper, something kind of drier, citrusy. It definitely comes through nicely with that caramel kind of competing against each other, so there's definitely a nice different flavour coming through. It's almost like a candied grapefruit, so if you think of a grapefruit that has some maybe brown sugar put on top of it, it's that kind of sweetness. It's sweet, it's sharp together. I'm not really getting a huge amount of that floral hoppy aroma that I was getting on the nose, so I'm going to go in for another sip and see if I can find that. After letting it sit for a second, letting it kind of get myself past the sugar, past the grapefruit, definitely got through some floral notes there. Almost grassy, kind of earthy, kind of herbal notes that came through. Very hoppy, a little dry. It's nice, it's not overly clingy, it's not overly lingering. It's just a nice kind of herbal note that comes through and kind of leads you into that finish. So I think I'm going to go ahead and talk about the finish now. Okay, on the finish, it's definitely the grassy notes. They kind of hang around a bit and then they fade away. So it's kind of like you get your sugary sweetness up front, then you get the earthy kind of herbal grassy notes, and then they fade away, leaving you with that sweetness again. It kind of lingers. It's got that grain alcohol sweetness that comes through. The hoppy notes, that citrusy notes, they kind of fade away. It is actually quite reminiscent of an IPA beer. If you drink an IPA, you know, it's a little bit dry. Your mouth does dry out a little bit when you drink it. It's kind of like that. It has that same kind of feeling to it. Now, as for how this stacks up against the Jameson Caskmates Stout edition, I do think the Caskmates Stout edition is a bit better. I think the kind of combination of the caramel sweetness with that chocolatey coffee note really worked well in the Caskmates Stout edition. I think the IPA one, it's just it doesn't really hit the same heights for me. It's not a bad whiskey, not by any stretch of the imagination. It just doesn't really hit those same heights. That said, I do think this will be much more versatile in a cocktail. So that Caskmates Stout edition, it's nice, yeah, but it's kind of limited in what you can use it for. You need to have like a coffee or chocolatey note that comes through, otherwise the whiskey does get lost. I think this will be much more usable in different cocktails. Like you might be able to use something with grapefruit with it, you might be able to use something drier, kind of sweeter, and this I think would stand up a bit better. So it is, I think, a bit more versatile in that regard. But as for a whiskey that you can just sip neat, if you see this or the Caskmates Stout edition, I'd say go for the Caskmates Stout edition unless you've already had it, and then you might want to give this one a try. Actually, thinking about cocktails I might use this in, I think it might actually go well in like a riff on a Paloma, where you use grapefruit soda and lime juice to kind of give a nice, refreshing, summery cocktail, and this might actually work pretty well in that. So I think I'm actually going to try making one of those after this video, and if you want to see that, come back on Friday, because I put out cocktail recipes every Friday and whiskey reviews every Wednesday. So if you want to see more, scroll down, hit subscribe, hit thumbs up, it's free, I swear. I think that's all I have to say about this whiskey, so I'm going to enjoy this, I'm going to make myself a cocktail, and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.